Mr. David Shoebridge.
Madam Deputy President, I stepped outside for I think some of the heat rather than the light that was cast in the debate earlier. I know for a fact that my colleague Dr. Marine Faruqi cares passionately about this issue and supported this inquiry and was a strong supporter of the inquiry and its recommendations. I know that the two likely suspects I see on the government benches at the back there, the Honourable Greg Pearce and the Honourable Catherine Cusack, vociferously opposed the inquiry, and then in their contributions on the inquiry, with all due respect to their political efforts, they were seeking to undermine this inquiry from day one. And that was unfortunate.
Point of order.
That was unfortunate.
Point of order.
Point of order.
That is a personal attack.
That is a direct reflection on my integrity, and I ask that the member withdraw that outrageous assertion.
Well, to the point of order. It's not a question of the member's integrity. It's a political issue. The member was politically opposed to this inquiry and used her political skills to seek to undermine it, both in getting the numbers to get it up in the first place, which she opposed, and in the operation of the inquiry. It's not a question of her integrity, it's a question of her politics.
To the point of order, the member has stood up and said that I sought to undermine a committee and its inquiry from day one. The debate and the allegations that he has subsequently made, which are actually factually incorrect, do not detract from the fact that he has smeared me as a member of this place, as a committee member, by accusing me of undermining the committee from day one of an inquiry, and I ask that be withdrawn.
Madam Deputy President, in order to try and get on with the matter, I will withdraw the words and I'll let the record speak for itself. Point of order.
Gregory Pearce.
Madam Deputy President, the member also suggested that I undermine the workings of a committee of this House. That is offensive, and I expect him to withdraw it in terms of...
Unreservedly.
The same. I will withdraw it. I'll let the record speak for itself. Now, to get to the substance of this inquiry, we had the Honourable Greg Pearce say, and he said it, from what I could tell with a straight face, that this inquiry was a failure.
No,
what this inquiry...
farce.
No. At the end there, you said it was a failure and failed to achieve anything. What it did achieve was this: it exposed the lack of integrity behind the government's moves, not only to remove the rail line, that appallingly 20th century approach to public transport in our second largest city in the state, this sort of LA mindset, the LA freeway mindset that occupies the government benches, all the way from the leader of this House, Duncan Highway Gay, all the way down to the small two-lane autobahn that is the Honourable Greg Pearce sitting up over there. They're one-eyed opposition to public transport. Whether it's a cycleway in Sydney or it's a railway line in Newcastle, they can't bear public transport. So what do? In our second biggest city, they sneak around behind the backs of the residents and they hatch a plan to tear the railway line, the heavy rail, out of the heart of the second biggest city in this state. Around the rest of the globe, where they actually comprehend that we're facing issues of climate change, urban congestion, and a desperate need for increased public transport, they're building heavy rail. They're building light rail. They're building public transport. But this government, because they have so little respect for the people of Newcastle, think they're a bunch of mugs and are telling them that taking the heavy rail out of the centre of Newcastle would be good for Newcastle. So we interrogated this government. And what did we find? We found vacillation. We found a complete lack of evidence. And when we actually discovered the report that went to Cabinet, that came out of the Ministry for Transport, and it fell off the back of a truck in a still mysterious way that found itself at the back of a filing cabinet in the member for Newcastle's office.
Cabinet paper.
A cabinet paper behind a cabinet. Yes, thank you, the Honourable Fred. We find that even their own bureaucrats don't support what they're doing. Even their own bureaucrats say that they're wasting public money and doing grossly inappropriate things with public transport. And of course, what's the government's response to that? Well, the government's response was, well, that's why we buried it. That's why we didn't give it to the public, because it was embarrassing. Well, of course it was embarrassing, because the very idea of pulling heavy rail out of the second biggest city in this state is embarrassing to the core. And when we asked the residents of Newcastle, do you support it? Do you oppose it? The overwhelming answer was they love their rail line and they don't want it torn out. Of course, there were a couple of well-connected developers. There was a former Lord Mayor who had a large property portfolio where he wanted to have a light rail go down in front of it to increase the number of patrons who might go to his property portfolio, increase the value of his property portfolio. And I understand why he wanted to tear up the rail and put a light rail in front of his properties. There was one of the managers of the Hunter Development Corporation who had a nice property at Wickham, right where the government was going to be truncating the railway line and building a rail interchange. Unfortunately, at the time when he bought the property, the view from his property across to the harbour was obstructed by a railway station and a railway line. But don't you worry, because the Hunter Development Corporation, with the cooperation of that mob over there, have decided they will open up the view from his property. They'll take away the railway station, they'll take away the railway line, and they'll give his property lovely access to the harbour. And not only that, build a transport interchange there to put thousands and thousands of additional patrons right in front of his property, his commercially zoned property and his residentially zoned property. You beauty, he said, and promptly sold it. Sold it for profit with a substantial increased development yield out of a DA that he got. So it's not everybody was against what the government was doing. They had their friends, they had their mates, they had their supporters. It's just that none of them were ordinary residents in Newcastle. None of them were the mums and dads from Maitland or Dungog or Scone who want to catch the train, not almost to Newcastle, they want to catch the train to Newcastle. And they don't want to be getting off the train at Wickham or Hamilton with their shopping or their shopping bags or their mobility impaired and changing modes of transport at Wickham or Hamilton to get onto a substandard bus service and add half an hour to their journey just to get to the beach or just to get to the centre of Newcastle CBD. But they don't care. They don't care because they loathe public transport and they, just like the previous Labor government, how quickly they've fallen into bed with the developers. How quickly they've sunk to the lows, the worst lows that, I hope Labor's climbing away from. But these guys, they're wallowing down at the lowest common denominator. And how quickly they got there. Less than, 2.5 years in office. So, with the benefit of looking at what this government was doing, exposing their decision-making, exposing that tight little coterie, the quiet little mayor's table that the former Lord Mayor had got together. I forget what it was. It was some sort of steering group that the Lord Mayor got with his mates from Urban Task Force and a little multi-billion-dollar private property trust that they were in bed with to increase the yield. They all got together with their little round tables and they were trying to work out the future of Newcastle City, excluding the residents. Well, the residents were told, in fact, they were told by the former Minister for Transport, and they were told by the former Minister that the election would be a referendum, the election in the Hunter would be a referendum on this government's plans to, in their words, revitalise Newcastle, basically knock over the east end of it, and would be a referendum on the plans for the railway line. Well, we've had the referendum. We've had the referendum, and the Honourable Greg Pearce knows what the results of the referendum in the Hunter were. Every single coalition MP was thrown out on their ear. Thrown out on their ear because their little property developer manifesto for Newcastle was rejected by the residents. So roundly rejected that there's like a 100-kilometre buffer between coalition MPs. You'll run into one somewhere around about Hornsby. I think one survived in Gosford. And then you've got like 100 Ks before you can find the next one lurking around the wrong side of the north side of Port Stephens, lurking around up there. But that old centre lost to the coalition because they reject your views for Newcastle, the rail and the centre of that wonderful city.